It is really exciting to me to begin this class in Hebrew, something that I resisted as a child, something that I really didn't want to learn, something that I thought, what a useless language it is to learn Hebrew. How little I considered that someday I would be serving God and really need even a lot more Hebrew than what the rabbi tried to teach me. Yes, from the age of about 5 to the age of 12, I sat in Hebrew classes, had to learn how to pronounce these different letters, how to read Hebrew, and of course, be able to reason, question, answer in Hebrew so that I could someday receive my bar mitzvah. It's important for us to actually take this time because one of the things that God taught me is that there are good reasons for actually learning Hebrew. I've noted down a couple of them, but there are actually more than that that I have considered now. Why would we bother wanting to learn Hebrew? First of all, it could be so that you could read the Tanakh. Tanakh, that's the Hebrew word for what we call the Old Testament, the Scriptures. They were written in Hebrew. Secondly, it could be that you just want to know how to correctly pronounce a Hebrew word when you see it written. That's also important, something that I think a lot of times when I hear somebody trying to pronounce a Hebrew word and I go, ooh, no, that's not right, then I would say, yeah, it's important to actually take the time to learn how to speak Hebrew. It could be that you want to be able to understand some of the words as they were written in the original language of the Old Testament. You realize Hebrew is such a rich language in expressing the love of God and the will of God to man. It was the very first language that God chose to be able to express His will for man in giving us even not just the 10 Commandments, but the entire book of the law, what we call the 5 books of Moses. These are all important aspects. And I say to everyone who ever had to learn something that they thought was completely useless, let me point out to you, if the Jewish people had not spent thousands of years from the time they were taken in exile, 605 BC, before Christ, already taken away to the land of what we today call Iraq, and forced there to serve Nebuchadnezzar, and then later, of course, Belshazzar and Cyrus, Alexander the Great, and so forth. If this had never happened, then we might expect that the Hebrew language would have continued. But how did the Jewish people continue to preserve the Old Testament without a language? Well, God already had that in mind. And so children were taken and taught to read. Universally, the Jewish people had an education that children were taught to read and to understand and to speak what should be their native language, the Hebrew language. Now, I grew up in a home where my parents spoke several languages. But most importantly, when I was taken to the synagogue and enrolled, it was so that I could learn to speak Hebrew and to read Hebrew. In that way, Over thousands of years, we preserved the Old Testament, made sure that there were always people that would understand what the Old Testament said. When it came time to translate this into English and Spanish and so forth, there were still people, millions of them, who could read and write in Hebrew, who could help and teach it so that we might be able to have a translation of the Bible today. This is still necessary. We still need people who can read and write in Hebrew. Now, thankfully, we have a nation now, Israel, born in 1948, that speaks Hebrew. Therefore, we have a nation where this is an important aspect, that the language is carried on. This was something that the Jewish people understood from the very beginning, that they would have to continue the preservation of the Holy Scriptures. You remember that Paul said that to them. What advantage then hath the Jew, and what profit of circumcision? Much in every way, but chiefly that unto them were committed the oracles of God. That you find in Romans chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. Yes, the Jewish people were charged with this. Therefore, the language had to be preserved. And we had to know its meaning, how to read it, how to pronounce it. The Psalms, the 6 books, I know a lot of people say 5, but there are 5 of them that are grouped together in our Bible: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. But there's also Lamentations, which is another poetical book, as we say, or it was actually sung. Now, these books were important books, and we had to know how to sing them. We had to know how to read them and understand them. So what we're learning in this class is going to be fundamental. Now, to do this, we have to understand some things about reading Hebrew. The direction of reading Hebrew is not like reading English. Yes, we start at the top of the page, but we start at the top right of the page and we read to the left all the way down till we get to the bottom left corner of the page. The formation of words. It's also an important topic for us to understand. In English, it's very different than what we're going to find in Hebrew. In English, you can have a word that has many, many consonants clumped together. In fact, some consonants are used as what we call syllabic consonants. Syllabic consonant, from a linguistic point of view, means a consonant that also acts like a vowel, especially R and L. Like in the name Bert. Bert phonetically would be written as B-R-T. There is no vowel in the name Bert. The R takes the place of a vowel. Therefore, we in linguistics draw a little line under the R, and by doing so indicate that it is acting as a vowel. The word bottle, the first part, ba, has a vowel, of course, but then bottle, bottle. The L there actually is what we call a syllabic L. It takes all the emphasis of the syllable as if it were a vowel. In Hebrew, it is not that way. In Hebrew, we do not have syllabic letters. we do not have syllabic consonants. We have instead vowel pointings. And letters always follow a different sort of scheme. For instance, in English, the word circle, there you have, by the way, another syllabic L, circle. Circle could be written as C standing for consonant, V standing for vowel, CV, CC, V, C, CV, CC, VC, circle. The word construction is another example. It would be CV, C, CCC, V, CC, VVC. Construction. There, of course, you have a diphthong, which would be two vowels coming together, but a cluster of consonants. And these consonants, of course, have to be separated. In Hebrew, it's not that way. In Hebrew, the word is always formed as consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. Now, of course, there are exceptions, and a word may end in a consonant. Therefore, it could be consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant. And a word could be as little as 2 letters, of course, which would just be nothing more than consonant, vowel, or consonant, vowel, consonant. Therefore, it's important for us to understand these distinctions. And we must understand that always in Hebrew, the letters are pronounced the same, not like in English. So, understand the yod also. The letter yod, which is shaped more or less like this, is the smallest letter of the Hebrew aleph bet. Now, you did notice that I called it aleph bet, and I did so on purpose because what we call the alphabet is named after alpha and beta, the first 2 letters of the Greek alphabet. However, in Hebrew, the first 2 letters are called aleph bet, and we call this the Hebrew aleph bet. The yod is an exception. At times, it takes the place of a consonant, but at times it also is considered as a vowel. Just like in English, when you say you, there, Y-O-U, you are using the letter Y as a consonant. However, there are words like bite, B-Y-T-E, which consider the Y as if it were a vowel. The same is true in Hebrew. The aleph bet is made up of 22 consonants. 22. There are only 22 letters in the Hebrew aleph bet, and they are all consonants. There is no upper and lower case. They are all uncials. They are all written as if uppercase or lowercase did not exist. There is no distinction made. The consonants have no vowels unless you consider yod a vowel at times, in which case it was the first language that had a written vowel. Hebrew, however, has an advantage. Whenever we're saying that the letter is pronounced in a certain way, The Hebrew letters are always pronounced in the same way. Even in Spanish, the letters are not always pronounced the same way, and certainly not in English either. For instance, in the word circus, the first C in circus is pronounced like an S, circus. If you just took the first syllable, sir, you would write it S-I-R. But in considering the word circus, the second C is pronounced like a K. C-I-R-C-U-S. So it is not circus, it's not circus, it is circus. But in Hebrew, it is not that way. The letters have a uniform pronunciation. So we need to learn that uniform pronunciation. Another little twist. Several of the letters have what we call a dot in them, which is called in Hebrew a dagesh. That dagesh, or dot in the letter, forms a part of 6 different letters in Hebrew, and the dot changes the pronunciation. The dot in one case is above the letter, but in the other 5 cases it is in the middle of the letter. Therefore, understanding the purpose of dagesh will help us in being able to pronounce the letter correctly. The first letter, and we're not going to learn all the letters at this time, but the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the letter Aleph. Now, when we learn Aleph, which is going to be in the continuation of this lesson, we will learn that each and every one of the letters is actually a pictogram. It is picturing something. The word Aleph means ox, and as such, you can see its 2 horns and its 2 feet. It's also interesting to note that a lot of Jewish scholars mention that the yod appears in every letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Yod, of course, is the first letter of Yahweh, the name of God. And in every single letter there is a yod. In the Aleph, there are 2 yods, one above and one below. Hebrew scholars mention that this is showing that God came down to man. There is one above and one below. Therefore, understanding that, the letter Aleph is silent. We're not sure if the letter Aleph ever was pronounced, and if it was, what its pronunciation was. Because if it were pronounced, it has been lost in antiquity. Well before our time, the letter Aleph was never again pronounced. Instead, it is used as a consonant to carry the vowel pointing. Vowel pointings are something that are added below, in the most part, only in one case is it above the letter. In one case, it's to the side of the letter. All the rest of the vowel pointings of the 13 different vowels, only 2 of them are marked either beside or above the letter. So let's consider the second letter. The second letter can be written with or without a dagesh. Now, the second letter is pronounced without a dogish as vet, vet. It is bilabial, that is, you use both lips. It is fricative, that is, v. There is that sound of friction. And it is voiced, so that if you touch your vocal cords, you should be able to sense them vibrating when you go vet, vet. Otherwise, it would be fet, fet. That's what we call voiceless. Now, I'm using the International Linguistics format to teach the sounds. Oftentimes, you will see the letter vet written as vet, as if it were a V. Even Jewish people will distinguish between the bet with a dogish and the vet without a dogish by writing it as a V. However, for our purposes, we will write this as a B with a line through it, indicating that it is a B fricative. With a dogish, then, it is pronounced as a hard B, bet, which makes it like the Greek beta. And it is bilabial, stop, and voice. Stop means that the air actually is stopped when you're pronouncing the word. Bet. There is a stop there where your lips come together and everything is stopped so that you cannot say it without an explosion as you're saying the letter. Bet. So you have aleph, vet, and now bet. The next letter also has a dogish in it. It is the letter gimel. Without a dogish, it is pronounced as chimel, chimel, chimel. It is a G sound, which is velar, that is, it's pronounced using the velar region of the mouth toward the back of the mouth, but not all the way back to the throat. And it is fricative and voiced, just the same way as you make the G sound in English. Gimel, gimel. By the way, the word gimel in Hebrew is the word camel. Without the dogish, chimel, chimel. With the dogish, gimel. The next letter also has a dogish. It is dalet. Now, by the way, you notice that there's an H after the T. But that doesn't make it daleth. Daleth, no. It's dalet. Dalet. The H after the T indicates, in this case, that we're pronouncing it with an aspiration. Dalet. Instead of dalet and cutting it off. Now, without the dogish, it is pronounced as thalet, thalet. Like the TH in mother. And no one says TH like in moth. That's different. That's the theta of Greek. Voiceless. This is voiced. It is interdental, fricative, and voiced. Thalet, thalet. With the dogish, it is dalet, dalet, a hard D, stop. An alveolar, stop, and voiced. Now, what is alveolar? Well, it is the bony ridge behind your teeth on the upper teeth. That's called the alveolar ridge. So this is called alveolar, stop, and voiced. Dalet. Next you have the letter Hey. Hey. It's like the H of he. It is voiceless also. Like that. He. And it is called hey. Hey. Next you have Vav or Waw. This is written, we have never come to the place where we have a description of all the Hebrew letters in English that is consistent. Some Jewish people write this as Vav and pronounce it like V. Other people pronounce it as Wa and write it as Waw, as W-A-W. You will find it written in several different formats, and the same thing is true on many of the Hebrew letters. This can be pronounced as V in victory or as W in Washington. Either way, it is a consonant. Now, why do we have variations of pronunciation? It's because there is a difference between Sephardic pronunciation and Ashkenazi pronunciation. Ashkenazim pronounce some letters one way, while Sephardim pronounce it a different way. We'll actually get into what those differences are and who the Sephardim are and who the Ashkenazim are in just a moment. Next letter is Zayin. Zayin. This is like the zeta of Greek. It is the Z sound of English. It is what we call a sibilant. Sibilant. It is alveolar, since the tip of your tongue is now on the alveolar ridge, and it is voiced. So it is not S. It is Zes. It is Zayin. Zayin. You should be able to feel your vocal cords vibrate when you say the letter Zayin. 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 Next, we have the letter Chet. 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 Chet is like the Chi of Greek. It is said a little bit further back than the Gimel. The Gimel was said at the place where you say the G. This is closer to the back of the mouth. Chet. Next you have Tet. Tet. Now, by the way, you will notice a great similarity here with the order of the Greek alphabet. The Greek alphabet follows nearly the same order. And why? Well, because the Greeks copied the Hebrew alphabet. And they transformed it, saying, because the word aleph didn't mean anything in Greek, like it does in Hebrew, they transformed it slightly, put the cow's head on the side, so that you have like that. On the aleph, the two horns are now facing to the side, and they called it alpha. But when you get to tet, you have what is similar or the same as the letter T in English, like the T of 10. Unaspirated, unlike the other T's that we have looked at. Tet. Tet. Then we have the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet. That letter is yod. The word yod means a hand. And therefore, some Jewish people pronounce the letter yod as yod, and others pronounce it as yud. Whichever way you pronounce it, understand this is a very important letter, though it is very tiny. It is the letter to which Jesus referred when he said, not one jot, not one yod, nor one tittle, dagesh, shall disappear, shall be done away with out of the Scriptures. His promise of preservation of the Word of God went all the way down to the smallest Hebrew letter, yod. Then we have the letter chaf. Chaf. Chaf is the letter that is pronounced like the chi of Greek, but just slightly further back in the mouth. Chaf. Now, if it is going to be with a dagesh in it, which this letter also can have a dagesh, then it is pronounced like the K in kill. K of kill. So it is kaf or it is chaf, depending on whether it has a dagesh or not. This letter also has a peculiarity that we haven't seen up to this point. It has what is called sophit. In Greek, we call that final position. So when this letter occurs in the final position, it is written differently. And then we call it kaf sophit. Sophit means final position in Hebrew, and it is the word that is used for this. So after K comes the letter L, and that is in Hebrew lamed. Lamed. Lamed is like the L of law. It is palatal, fricative, voiced, and liquid. Therefore, because it is liquid, like R's are liquid in English also, it can take the place of a syllable in English, but not in Hebrew. It is always a consonant in Hebrew. Mem is the next Hebrew letter. Mem. Mem also has two ways to write it. First of all, we'll consider it as initial or medial. That is, in the middle of a word or at the beginning of a word, mem is written in this form. But when it comes in the final position, it is mem sophit. There you'll notice that the mem is closed off. It is no longer open. It is bilabial, nasal, and voiced. So that when you're saying a nasal consonant, that means that part of the sound comes out of your nose, part of it out of your mouth. Mem. Even before you open your lips, you have part of the sound. By the way, if you closed off your nasal cavity, it would be ba. It would be beb, beb, closing off your nasal passage. But as soon as you open the uvular flap that closes off your nasal passage, then the consonant becomes nasal. So it is mem. And you can feel the vibrations coming through the nasal cavity. So you have mem and mem sophit. The next letter also has final position. It is called nun. So we have nun as in initial or in medial position is like the N in none. N of none. It is alveolar, that is, now your tongue is on the alveolar ridge, as it is, for instance, for S, but it is now a stop there, like it would be for T, except that you open your nasal passage and you pronounce it as noon, noon, noon. That is the letter that is the next letter in the alphabet. It also has nun sophete, nun sophete, so that you have a final position for this letter as well. Now we're going to continue on. We have gone through noon. The very next letter in the Hebrew alphabet is samek. Samek. It is pronounced like the S in the word soul. So what we're describing is alveolar. Again, it's the alveolar ridge. Fricative and voiceless. It is like zayin, but there is no voicing. So it's not z, it's s. Samek. Next is ayin. It is pronounced like the H in hun. It is not like the H in he, which is real close to the front of your mouth. You notice that? He. Your tongue touches the roof of your mouth close, very close in he, in the letter hey. It touches hey very close to your alveolar ridge, where in hun, it's touching very much further back near the rear of your mouth. It is guttural, therefore. Laryngeal and voiced. Hun, back toward the back of your mouth, and it is voiced. It's not it's he, so that it is back further and voiced. Ayin. Then you have the letter pe. Now pe occurs in three different forms. First of all, we will consider it in the form of without a doggish. Without a doggish, a lot of people would write this as an F, but the F is actually formed bilabial. That is, fe, 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 instead of fe, fe, fe. The F in English is pronounced using what we call labial dental. That is, your lower lip goes against your teeth. Fe, fe. But in Hebrew, it is pronounced using both lips. Fe, fe, fe. Much like the Greek, which always is written as a PH in English. Fe is bilabial, fricative, and voiceless. Voiceless. Now, the pe with a doggish is pronounced like the P of English, the P of pop. It is bilabial, stop, and voiceless also. Stop. That means the airstream is stopped. Pe. And then, of course, we have pe in the final position, which is called pe sophete. Pe sophete looks very much like pe, but now we straighten out the stem at the end of it, and instead of curling it back around, it is extended down. Pe sofit. Next we have tzade. Tzadi. Tzadi. Tzadi is a combination, what would be in English, two consonants, T and S or T and Z, Zadi or Tzadi. Now, where would you find such a combination? Well, how about in the word itself? Itself. There you have TS together in English. Or even more importantly, in the tsetse fly. Tsetse fly. There you have TS, TSE, TSE. Tsetse fly. This, by the way, is a fly that lives in Africa, which is mortal when a horse or some other animals are bitten by it. It is not fatal. This, by the way, is a fatal bite of a fly in Africa. The tsetse fly will kill some animals with its bite. However, not humans usually. You also find that TZ in the word matzah. Now, can I point out to you that sometimes the word matzah is written in different ways and is pronounced differently by different Jewish people depending on where they're from, whether they're Ashkenazim or they're Sephardim. Sometimes I have seen matzah written M-A-T-Z-O, matzo, but other times I have seen it written as M-A-T-S-A-H, M-A-T-Z-O-H, M-A-T-S-O-H. There are so many different ways to write this word. We'll stick with the most common that is in the dictionary, M-A-T-Z-O. And there you have that T-Z sound of tzadi, tzadi. You also have tzadi sofit, tzadi sofit. Now, by the way, I have changed the pronunciation to reflect both ways. Instead of saying tzadi, I said tzadi. But then I also said tzadi sofit, TS instead of TZ. Just understand that for the most part, depending on the vowel that follows it, it's going to be TS. But some vowels will make it to where S becomes voiced and it will sound like TZ. Next, you have what is usually called the letter Kof. Kof. Now, it is described in most grammars as the C of cough. Cough. Kof. However, the actual sound of this letter is what we call a glottal uvular stop. Now, the uvula closes off your nasal passage so that it is not nasalized. What is a glottal stop? A glottal stop takes advantage of what we call the epiglottis. The epiglottis is the little flap that covers over your trachea, that keeps water from going into your lungs, so that when you swallow, that little flap covers over your trachea and prevents water from going down your trachea and into your lungs. This is what oftentimes will happen when somebody's in a hurry. They're talking and trying to drink a glass of water at the same time, and all of a sudden they're coughing and everything, and say that they have actually gotten water down the wrong tube, you'll hear people say, down their trachea and into their lungs. So you have this letter now, which is actually like the in the words uh-oh in English. Uh-oh, you don't say uh-oh, oh. No, you say uh-oh, and you have that little stop that is made in the back of your throat as by using the epiglottis. It's called a glottal stop. So this letter is actually pronounced oaf, oaf, oaf. Next, you have the letter resh, resh. Now the letter resh is pronounced like the TT of butter. You don't say butter. Nobody says butter. You say butter. In which case, by the way, the word ends with a syllabic R. But the two T's before it are actually flapped R's. Butter, butter. Because your mouth is preparing to go toward the R, you actually move your tongue back. You're not going butter, you're going butter. So you can say this letter in English. Resh, 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 resh. Now, by the way, the word resh all by itself is found right away in the Bible. Bereshith. Resh is right there. It's a part of the first word of the Bible, which means beginning or head. When you say Rosh Hashanah, you're saying head of the year. Head of the year, or New Year's, as we call it in English. That has resh in it. Next letter has a dogish, and the dogish may change from the right to the left of the letter, so that if you have a sheen with the dot on the right, then that is pronounced as sheen, sheen, which is alveolar, fricative, and voiceless. Sheen, sheen. Then, if the dot being on the left of the letter, upper part of the letter, then it is pronounced seen, seen. By the way, the word sheen, Moses even uses this in the Bible because the word sheen means teeth, tooth for tooth. So you have sheen for sheen. And this particular word means tooth. Can you see 3 teeth there? And it indicates which tooth we're talking about, whether it's sheen or seen. Then we come to the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. This letter very much looks like the omega of Greek. Take a look and compare the two. Yes, they are very similar. That's because the Greeks did copy the Hebrew alphabet. However, they had no need for the letter that the Hebrews call tav, tav. Now, without a dogish, it is pronounced as thav, thav. In that case, by the way, it's interdental, fricative, and voiceless. But if it is with a dogish, it's still interdental, but it's tav, tav. T, more or less like the T of English, a little bit different in that instead of being alveolar, it's interdental. Tav, tav. So now we have all the consonants. 5 of these consonants that we have discussed have final forms, which are called sophit in Hebrew. They are kaf, sophit, mem, sophit, nun, sophit, pe, sophit, and tzadi, sophit. 6 of the Hebrew letters have a dagesh in them. We have actually looked carefully at each of them, but we will again mention vet and bet, chimel and gimel, thalet and dalet, chaf and kaf, fe and pei, sheen and seen,
Thav and Tav.
Some of the Hebrew letters of the alphabet are very similar to other letters, and I don't deny that. This can cause sometimes a little bit of confusion in the beginning. But can I point out that some English letters look very similar as well? For instance, the P and the B. You'll see a lot of kids that have trouble in the beginning trying to figure out the difference between P and B. Sometimes the I and the L, if we're not careful to put a dot over it, they can look very similar. Nonetheless, we distinguish them, we learn to distinguish between them. The M and the N also sometimes look very similar, and the N and the R in English look very similar, and sometimes can be confusing, even in printed form. So how are we going to do this? We're actually going to learn it, and we'll learn to distinguish between these letters. The confusion, therefore, between these letters will soon disappear. We are going to put these letters in a list here so that you can compare them in your book. They're on page 5. So you have bet and kaf. Bet and kaf. They look very similar, but they are different. And you could say gimel also looks similar. And noon also looks similar. But you'll notice that their similarities are only superficial, because if you study them a little bit, you notice that there is a tremendous difference. When we start to learn these letters, I will be describing the pictograms that they also picture, and therefore you'll understand how to distinguish them. Hey and chet, they look very similar. Zayin and vav, or waw, they look very similar. But you notice that there are differences. You could say that vet and fe look very similar also. But there are tremendous differences there. Hey and
Thav
also look very similar, but there are also differences. Ayin and Tzadi, they look very different when you study them, but initially they look very similar. And by the way, was probably the letter that took me the longest to distinguish was between Ayin and Tzadi. Tzadi comes back a little bit, where Ayin just goes straight across. But it takes a while to distinguish those. Between Chaf and Fe, they look very similar also. Between Mem, especially Mem Sofit, and Samech, they look very similar. But you notice that there are also some tremendous differences. The Mem is more squared, where the Samech is not. With that little bit of an understanding, let me now at least address the issues of modern Hebrew. I will give you the modern Hebrew orthography, that is, the way that Hebrew is written in script and in what we call box letters. I will show those, but we're not going to bother trying to learn to do those. I am most interested in that you identify and can write the Hebrew of the Hebrew Masoretic text. Now, we're not sure how Hebrew was pronounced before the Babylonian captivity, whether it had changed from the time of Moses. It may have. The pronunciation of some letters may have changed. Perhaps at the time that Moses wrote what we call the Pentateuch, the Torah, perhaps Aleph had a pronunciation. We're not sure about that. But one thing we are sure about is that today it doesn't, and we're not going to concern ourselves with what might have been that would be purely speculative. It is possible that Hebrew changed its pronunciation slightly during the Babylonian captivity, where the influence of Aramaic was tremendous upon Hebrew. It was before the Babylonian captivity as well. After all, the Hebrew people were in constant contact with the Gentiles around them. We're not sure if by the time the Lord Jesus Christ came, the Hebrew language had changed its pronunciation. But if it did, the Lord Jesus Christ spoke in Hebrew, and the Bible constantly reminds us of that fact. Therefore, the Hebrew that was spoken in his day apparently was all right with him. He was willing to speak it as it was spoken in his day. He didn't spend all his time running around trying to correct their Hebrew to make it back to the Hebrew pronunciation of the time of Moses. It is very likely, therefore, that even when he spoke from heaven, he was using the Hebrew that people understood in that day. We're not sure, since there are two variations of pronunciations on many letters between the Ashkenazim, which are the Jews of Eastern Europe, Germany, Poland, Russia, Ukraine, and so forth, the Slavic nations as well. We're not sure if their pronunciation is correct or the Sephardic pronunciation, or both, if they're just variations after all. The word shibboleth in your Bible indicates that there were even differences of pronunciation at the time that the Bible was being written, because the tribe of Benjamin pronounced it Sibboleth. So there have always been differences of pronunciation, and these differences are minor, yet we will make note of them. What we're going to try to follow is the Sephardic pronunciation of these letters. After all, it was the Sephardic pronunciation which represented the Jews from France, the British Isles, that is, those that survived and were not expelled or killed, Spain, the same thing could be true, Portugal, Italy, like Columbus, who was an Italian Jew, Northern Africa, Libya, and so forth, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, and of course, those Jews that survived in the land of Israel. Their pronunciation is called Sephardic pronunciation. They are the Sephardim. And their pronunciation, for the most part, is what has been accepted officially by the Israeli government. Therefore, as much as possible, understanding that our purpose is to learn to be able to speak and to read the Hebrew Masoretic text, we will try to follow their pronunciation. Vowel pointings. Vowel pointings is another interesting part of Hebrew. Hebrew has no true vowels written. Instead, underneath the consonants are written the vowel pointings, which indicate which vowel of the 13 different vowels and 10 different diphthongs that are written into the Hebrew language, which ones are to be pronounced with which words. Therefore, these vowel pointings are for the most part indicated by lines and dots, and in some cases 2 lines with a dot at the end of it that are pronounced in the 13 different ways, or the 10 different diphthongs. So that when you have this first one, it's pronounced as ba. And then going down the list, you have bai, and then ba, and then bay, and then bay. For you that may be thinking that this should be pronounced B, it is not, it's bay. And then be, like the epsilon of Greek, when it's the 3 dots. And then bay, and then B, which could also be bi, short. Then you have Bowie. Next, you have boy, boy. Then buoy, buoy. Then, when you have the Shiva, starting at the top of the right-hand list, you have ba, and then Bowie, Bowie, then ba, then you have ba, then bay. Next you have be, and then b, b, a diphthong. Next you have bow, and then baw, then boo, then buh. There you have represented the 13 different vowels and the 10 different diphthongs. So as we get into our first lesson this evening, understand I've just given you an overview of what we're going to learn. It may seem like a mountain of materials, but it is not. We're only going to have to learn 2 consonants and at the most 2 vowel pointings this evening. Now, each evening will cover up to 4 consonants at the most and 4 vowel pointings at the most. That will be the system which we will use, and in these next classes we will learn all 22 consonants and all 13 vowel pointings, as well as the diphthongs. May the Lord bless this study of Hebrew. May you get a lot out of it. And understand, this is just a beginning. It's just an introduction to Hebrew. Afterward, you will want to study Hebrew more, to get more in depth and be able to pronounce these words and be able to understand how Hebrew is formed. All the intricacies, and what a great language it was that God chose as the first language in which to express himself. This, the Jewish people believe, was the language that Adam and Eve spoke in the Garden of Eden. It is certainly the language that Jesus even spoke in the New Testament. And it was the language with which he conversed with the Apostle Paul. Yes, what a tremendous language, and a language which we would do well to understand. Now, in this evening's class, what we are going to go about doing is learning the first two consonants. So we are going to learn two consonants and two vowel pointings. Now, let me just warn you that in the rest of the classes, we are not going to follow the alphabet in order. This evening, we are going to follow it in order. At least the first two consonants are going to be aleph and bet. And we will learn two vowel pointings that we can use with those two consonants. The consonants that we're going to learn are aleph and bet. This is aleph. Aleph is our first consonant that we want to learn. So aleph looks like what it is supposed to look like, that is an ox. Now, as a number, it represents the number 1. So when we want to write the number 1 in Hebrew, we write aleph. Like Greek and Roman, it uses letters to represent numbers. So you realize in Roman numerals, the letter I represents 1. I is 2. I is 3. IV is 4. V is 5. X is 10. XX 20. L is 50. C is 100. And M is 1,000. Those are Roman numerals. You see, it took an Arab actually to invent a 0. We have our Arab friends to thank for having given us the numerical system that we use today, where we use numbers to represent numbers. But in Hebrew, they used letters. And the combination of letters, of course, could make almost any number that you could imagine. Aleph was 1. And the word aleph means an ox. So you can see not only what many Jewish people point out, how it has the yod as a part of every Hebrew letter. And in the aleph, of course, you have 2 yods there represented. But as a pictograph, you can see the 2 horns of the ox and its 2 feet. Now, I am also showing you how aleph is written as cursive in modern Hebrew. That is, how the Jewish people will mark the letter aleph when they're marking it in cursive in Hebrew. Also, you can see here on the page how it is marked as what is called a box letter. But when printed, and as you would find it normally in the Hebrew Masoretic text, it would be marked as you see it in the printed form. Next, remember that aleph all by itself has no sound. It is a silent letter. And as a silent letter, you would never find it pronounced in any way at the beginning, the middle, or the end of any word. Next, we have the Hebrew letter vet. Vet. Vet is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Written without a dagesh, it is pronounced as a B fricative. Now, the way that we note B fricative is a B with a line through it. That indicates that the letter is fricative. Any letter that you would find, a G with a line through it, a B with a line through it, means that you're pronouncing it as a fricative. So it is bilabial, fricative, and voiced. When spoken, it sounds like vet, like V of vet. But remember that it is not a V, but a B fricative, a V. So it's vet. Vet as a cursive is written in the following form, and vet as a box letter is written as you see it here on the page. Next, of course, we would have the letter bet. Bet. This is the second way of pronouncing the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, written with a dagesh, and it is pronounced as a B, or a hard B, which is a stop, a bilabial stop and voiced. As a word, the word bet is a prefix, and it means in. The word bite means house, or bait means a house. Bet is pronounced as the beta of Greek. Now, how does this represent a house? Look at it carefully for a moment. This is the door going into a house. It is propped open so that you can go in, and that's where the word in comes from this word. You're entering in. So when you have it in the very first word of your Bible, Bereshith, in the beginning. Bereshith, bet. Okay? Do you follow me there? Very well. There it means in. And as a whole word, beit means a house, such as in Bethlehem. There it means house of bread. Bethlehem, house of bread. Now this is the door going into the house. If you remember that, it's easy to distinguish it. The ground runs all the way across the bottom. That's why it goes past the letter on both sides. Whereas your doorway coming down is what you use to go into the house. The door is open and you're allowed to go in. Now that's one of the ways that I found that it was much easier to remember. Now we're on page 10. And the very first thing that we have on page 10 is our first vowel pointing. So this evening we only have 2 of them. And in most Hebrew studies for Gentiles, they put both of them as being ah. However, they are not both ah. They're very similar to ah, but not ah. The first one is like the ah in papa, so that it is the ah sound of the word papa in English. This particular one is called the amats, amats. Or some pronounce it kamats. But this sound actually, the ah there, is with that glottal stop in front. Amats. Amats. Now, that one should be easily distinguished. It has what looks like a T and a round dot at the end of it, so that you have a dash and then a short stem down and a dot underneath it. That's ah, amats. The next one is called patach, patach. This one is placed below the consonant. Notice that the aleph is not what's giving you the sound here. Aleph itself is silent. We're only using it to show what the vowel pointing is. The vowel pointing is what we're actually considering right now. The aleph itself makes no sound. It is the vowel pointing that is indicating the sound. The patach is also like the ah in bat. You notice it's not bat, it's bat. Ah, ah. Not ah like in papa. It is ah like in bat in English. The linguistic annotation for that is the ah, which is written as an AE joined together. That is what linguists use to denote that particular vowel. Aleph here is not a vowel, I repeat. The vowel is the patach. The aleph is just here to show the placement of the patach. So we have amats and patach. Amats and patach. Amats, which is the one that looks sort of like a T with a dot at the end. The amats, pronounced ah, of papa. The patach is just a straight line underneath the letter in Hebrew, under the consonant. So that's the patach. Very well. So now let me ask you, how would you pronounce this Hebrew letter with its vowel pointing?
Ba.
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 Ba. Yes, ba. How about this one?
Ab.
No, the one that's on your screen.
Oh, sorry. Ah.
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 Ah. Ah. Very well. How about this one? Now be careful because you have no dogish in this letter now.
Va.
Va. That's right. Now you do have a dogish, but we've changed the vowel.
Ba.
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 Ba. How about this letter?
Ah.
Ah. Ah. Now how about that one?
Ah.
Ah. Very well. Now how about this combination? This one has a dogish, Ba. Very good. How about this one?
Ah.
Ah. Very good.
Eh.
Eh. Very good. And this one?
Va.
Va. Very good. Now a little more.
Ba.
Va.
Va.
Very good. The aleph is silent, even though it's written there. It's not pronounced. And this one?
Be.
Ba.
Be.
And this one?
Av.
Av. Now, by the way, now we've actually come to a real word. Ba was also a word, but Ab is the first part of the name Abraham, which means Ab all by itself means father. Ab. And here we have another word.
Ba.
Ba, came.
Av.
Ab. And there again you have the first two letters of the name Abraham, Abraham, father of a multitude, father of many nations. How about this one?
Ba.
Ba. Another vocabulary word here. What is that?
Ba.
Ba. What does it mean?
Ba.
Came.
Okay.
And here you have another vocabulary word.
Av.
Ab. What does it mean? Father. Ab. Ab. Ba. What does that mean?
Av. Ba.
Father came. Okay, let's review a little bit our letters. We have Aleph and Bet or Bet. And no problem, even a lot of Jewish people pronounce it Vet instead of Vet. But in this class, at least, we're going to follow the pronunciation that I was taught in the synagogue, which is bilabial, Vet. Now, as we consider that, we have the two vowel pointings. The one is A, and the other is A. A is just a straight line underneath the letter. A, like in bat. The line with the little line going down and the dot at the bottom, that one that we call ametz or comets, as it is pronounced by some, is the letter A. A. So if we take just those two letters, two consonants and two vowel pointings, with nothing more than that, which is easy enough for us to learn tonight. If we take just those two and we put them together, we have two words. First of all, ba, ba, came, came. Now, can I just mention one little thing about Hebrew? Not only do the nouns change, nouns have gender in Hebrew, so masculine and feminine. So every single animal that Adam named had a masculine and feminine gender to it. In English, we have very few words that have gender to them. Very few. Now, we assign gender sometimes, like saying she's a real beauty, talking about a car or a house or something like that. However, words don't have true gender in English. Now, of course, some words do, like cow is feminine in English, whereas bull is masculine. You don't say a female bull, okay? Nor do you say a male cow. If you want the general term, by the way, it's cattle or kine in English. The same thing would be true with dog. So you have a female dog is called a bitch in English, and even though that is a dirty word in some instances in English, it is a very good word when it's used properly. So there are some words that show some gender in English, but in Hebrew all words have gender, and they all are either masculine or feminine. But it doesn't stop there. All the verbs are also masculine and feminine. We have just learned came, ba, came. That's masculine. Father came, ba. I will only mention it because we are going to learn later. M is mother. But when she comes, ba'ah. And we add an ending to it that makes it feminine. Do you realize there's only one verb in Hebrew that is never expressed in feminine? One verb exists. This is free tonight. Later you'll need to learn it. But for right now, I'll just mention the verb barach. Create from nothing. Only God creates from nothing. And it's only expressed in masculine. There is no baracha. Okay, as if a female God could have created. Does not even exist as a verb. There is no female version of barach. So as you're learning your words tonight, you only have two words. Two consonants, one of them with a dagesh, and that same one also without the dagesh. So you have aleph, which is silent, and you have bet or vet. Likewise, you have just two vowel pointings, just two. You have amatz and patach. So that in patach, it's always a. And in amatz, it's always a. A, such as in papa. And a, as in the word bat or fat. Okay? Those are the only two that we have to worry about. Combining those two, we have ab, which is father, as in Abraham, and we have ba, which is came, in the masculine. Okay? That's all that you need for your first lesson. Now let me recommend to you right now to take lesson number 1 and drill it over and over and over again after the class tonight. Likewise, let me recommend to you to have each student take a copy of this disc home and drill it over and over and over again until he gets every single one of the questions right. For your exam, in the next class, you have the first 12 questions. They're very easy questions. You only have 2 consonants and 2 vowel pointings to answer on. So the first question is, how many consonants are there in Hebrew? The correct answer, 22. What is the name of this letter? Aleph. Question number 3. What is the name of this letter? Vet. And you write that as B-E-T-H, because there's an aspiration. It's not Beth, it's Bet. Okay? Because when you pronounce it, you don't go bet, it's Bet. And in that case, without the dogish, it is pronounced Vet. So draw a line through the B. What is the name of this letter? Bet. With a dogish in it, it's pronounced as Bet. How do you pronounce this letter? Well, you pronounce it as a B with a line drawn through it. Number 6, how do you pronounce this letter? With a dogish in it, you pronounce it as a B. Number 7, how do you pronounce this vowel pointing? You pronounce it as ah. Number 8, how do you pronounce this vowel pointing? You pronounce it as ah. So you write that as ah, eh. Okay? Then number 9, what does this word mean? Ba. It means came in the masculine. Transliterate the above word. You would transliterate it B-A. What does this word mean? Ab. It means father. Transliterate the above word. You would write A-B with a line through the B. That's up to number 12. So that'll be your exam the next time as we open the class. Study it hard. There are only 2 letters and 2 vowel pointings that you need to learn for tonight. After we've drilled these over and over and over again, you will not have a problem remembering them.